All right, greetings everyone. Either good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are, East or West Coast or somewhere in the middle. My name is Andom. I am one of the members of the Eritrean-American Bar Association, and I'm here to welcome you all for our panel today. We have three very distinguished panelists. Each of them have worked or are currently working in some area of criminal law. And a lot of the times, that's an area that we don't have a lot of representation in. So we thought we should host a panel and have each of our panelists kind of tell you about their career paths and some of the things that led them into this career. Before we do that though, I do want to let everyone know that we have a disclaimer, since we all are working for the government in some way, form or another, including myself. I'm a deputy district attorney here in California. The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed during today's program are solely those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent. Also, none of the information that is shared here today should be construed as legal advice. So now that we've got that out of the way, I do want to start off by just doing an introduction. I'll just pick an order if that's okay. I'll start with Lula. Lula, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure.
Tell us where you're located and how long you've been an attorney and what type of law you currently practice.
Sure. Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Lula Hagos. I currently work at George Washington University Law School. I'm the director of the Criminal Defense Clinic there, and I've been practicing for, I'm beginning to lose track, 13 years.
Great, thank you so much. And Leah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So my name is Leah Abraham. I currently work as a deputy district attorney in Alameda County. And if people aren't familiar with that county, its main city is Oakland, California. And I've been practicing. This is my 10th year practicing.
Thank you, Leah. And Andom, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Will do. Thanks, Andom. So yeah, my name is Andom Gherezghiher. I am a active duty service member in the Marine Corps. I am currently the Deputy Staff Judge Advocate for Marine Forces Space, Marine Forces Cyber, and Marine Forces Information. For pertinent information for this panel, I previously served as a Assistant Attorney General for the state of Missouri, highest prosecutor in the state. Worked there for a while before I joined the service. Within the service, I spent about 2 years as a federal prosecutor in Southwest, Special Assistant U.S. Attorney in Southern District of California, prosecuting all kinds of cases. And then I've also, a couple years down the road, I spent 2 years as the senior defense counsel for the basically for the East Coast, all Marine Corps bases east of the Mississippi, as well as Marine Forces Europe and Africa, defending national security cases, primarily felony level misconduct and charges. And then I spent a year as, can everyone hear me? There's some folks in the chat so they can't hear.
I can hear you.
Okay, we're good. And then I spent a year as a victims legal counsel. I know some jurisdictions have that. It's kind of, the third seat in the galley, where you are especially appointed to represent victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, or other kind of delineated offenses, to represent the interests of the victim in court. So I've got a little experience on kind of all three sides of the aisle.
So now I want to ask each of you to kind of tell us a little bit about your professional background in criminal defense or prosecution. Tell us anything you can about kind of the types of assignments you've had, et cetera. And I'll start with Leah, if that's all right.
Sure. So I actually went to law school at Hastings with Andom, and I was, I think, a year ahead of him. And I went to law school with the goal of becoming a public defender, which I did. I interned at several different public defenders' offices in law school, and I ended up getting a job at the Alameda County Public Defender's Office. And I did that for about 6.5 years. And then, and I thought I'd do that job for my rest of my career and be a public defender for, until retirement. But a progressive DA was elected in San Francisco by the name of Chesa Boudin, and it felt like a very kind of exciting opportunity to work for a DA that was openly committed to making reforms in the system. And so I ended up leaving to go work for him as a deputy district attorney. I worked for him for about 2.5 years. I ended up leaving when he was recalled by the citizens of San Francisco. And I worked for a nonprofit that worked with progressive, newly kind of progressive elected DAs in the country. And I did that for about 8 months until Pamela Price was elected in Alameda County. And I ended up coming back to the Bay and working for her. So I currently work with her for her office. And right now I work in the domestic violence kind of unit. I'm reviewing cases for charging right now.
All right, thank you. And Lula, can you tell us a little bit about your professional background, kind of the type of assignments and the work you've done leading up to now?
Yeah, sure. So I've spent most of my professional career as a public defender, mainly in the DC area. Right after law school, I did go to New York to work for a large international law firm, but that was brief. Didn't really like it. It wasn't for me. And then soon after, I had the privilege of doing a fellowship program at Georgetown Law. It's a criminal defense fellowship called the Pretty Men. For anyone who's interested, it's a great program. I highly recommend it. And that gave me an incredible foundation in criminal work and litigation. I started off handling misdemeanor cases and then moved on to felony cases under the guidance of the faculty there.
But a hot mic.
Do you mind me muting? Okay. I forgot what I was saying, but I handled cases in the fellowship program under the guidance, close guidance of the faculty at Georgetown. So I learned how to be a public defender. And then in the second year, I taught and supervised third-year law students there in their juvenile cases. I was in the juvenile justice clinic. And it was just an all-around great experience. After that program, I went on to be a trial attorney at the Public Defender Service for DC. I did that for about 7 years. And then more recently, I was a public defender in federal court in the Eastern District of Virginia with the Office of the Federal Public Defender in Alexandria. And since then, I've transitioned to law school teaching. So my role is a little bit different now. In the summer of 2021, I was hired by GW to launch their first in-house criminal defense clinic. So I manage that program. I teach and supervise the law students there. We handle misdemeanor cases only because law students can't handle felonies. And what else? And it was a pilot program, and now it's a permanent clinic, and I've been hired permanently to be part of that faculty. So that's where I am now.
Great, thank you. Ask Andom, what motivated you to pursue this career path?
So I guess mine is a little bit different. I come from a law enforcement background. My my grandfather was a military police officer, and back in the day, this is in Eritrea, there was kind of a hybrid system between like local jurisprudence and then like penal code jurisprudence. This is during the Haile Selassie time. So he was in and out of the courtrooms all the time, and it was always very interesting to me. So I think I like my time as prosecutor. I like wearing the white hat, being able to effectively kind of control justice and ensuring equitable results. I had previous experiences in law school that were not great with the law school and undergrad. I was active in student government. There was a lot of issues going on. I went to the University of Missouri, and I realized that to be part of the solution, you've got to get your hands dirty. So that's kind of why I liked that realm. So right out of law school, I jumped at the opportunity to work for the Attorney General, and really got some interesting cases up front that kind of opened my eyes to not just criminal matters protecting civilians, but I worked in the consumer protection division, which really opened my eyes to kind of white collar crime and how big business, big regulations, or big whatever take advantage of the little guy, if you will, right? So I was involved early on in some really big multi-state litigations with tobacco cessation devices in big insurance companies that had predatory practices across Missouri, Illinois, Oklahoma, and Iowa. So yeah, that's kind of wanted to help people. And then fast forward, when I got to work, I thought of myself as a government hack, and then I got to work on the other side, and the defense world kind of opened my eyes to a whole nother, a different vantage point, if you will, that not everyone wears the white hat, right? I guess for people don't know what the white hat means. When you're a prosecutor, you're supposed to be kind of neutral. Facts, circumstances, the law, interpret and effect. It's not personal. It's not, politics really shouldn't play, in my mind, shouldn't play a role in your charging decisions and actions at trial. So just being able to purely look out for the well-being of society, that really wasn't, I got to see the dirty side of it from the defense and spent 2 years on the defense bar, and really solidified my interest in the field. Hope that answered your question, so.
Yes, very, very, very good answer. Thank you. Leah, do you mind if I ask you what motivated you to pursue criminal law out of law school? And then also, what motivated you to work with progressive prosecutors?
So what motivated me to be, when I was growing up, my family always said I should be a lawyer. And that's usually just what you say to kind of children that argue too much and are kind of like, I don't know, quote unquote brats. And maybe that was, I was a little argumentative. I had a sense of what was fair, was not fair. So growing up, I think that was what was messaged to me. But I didn't take that seriously. I didn't know any lawyers. And so I didn't really think that was, I would watch law shows, and that was my perception of what lawyers were. So I didn't think that was a good fit for me. And then I, went to, community college, and then I took a break and was focusing more on work, and working in a nonprofit kind of like solidified for me, I want to go back to school at least and finish my university degree. And then I went back, I interned for a judge. At that point, I thought maybe I'd become a lawyer, and I interned for a judge in San Francisco, and she was her name was Terry Jackson, and she was a judge. She was a former prosecutor, and she was a judge for criminal matters in San Francisco. And so I saw DAs go against public defenders, and I saw observed trials, and I just had an opportunity to see it. And I felt a lot of compassion. I was very drawn to the defense. I was very drawn to the person that was accused of the crime. And I felt it wasn't like a rational decision per se. It was just more like, this is what I'm drawn to. This is who I'm connecting to, and feeling, what it kind of seeing what it means to defend someone, and to, kind of be the one person in the courtroom that is supporting that person. Because everybody else in the courtroom is generally adverse to that person being accused of a crime. And so I decided to become a public defender. And I think then there were other things in my background that kind of then made more sense. Like, I think, being the child of immigrants, you end up a lot of times, and at least in my case, speaking for my mother, advocating for my mother, kind of taking that role in the family system when you're the American born one. And so, you kind of sets you up to be the voice of other people. And so I think that made sense to me at the time. And so I then wanted to be a public defender, and I really enjoyed I loved my job actually. And I did a lot of trials and it was very exciting. But at the time that I went to law school, I have to say there wasn't a term progressive prosecutor. So for me, at least, speaking for myself, it did feel like if I wanted to make change in the system at that time from 2010 to 2013, I felt like I had to be a public defender. I didn't feel like I could make that change in a DA's office. But then when the movement started to, take off and people were getting elected in different jurisdictions, I started, and also just the whole scene, not even just that, the whole criminal justice scene kind of changed a lot in California from when I graduated from law school to, years later. Like when I went to law school, you could go to prison for a petty theft with priors. You could go to prison for personal possession of a drug, no sales, which to me, in my opinion, is very unjust. But that all changed while I was being a lawyer. So my sense of what could change, I felt very optimistic about it because I was seeing it change. And so when a progressive prosecutor got elected in San Francisco, and I think it took all of us by surprise. We didn't expect that he was going to win necessarily. And so when he did win, I wanted to work for him. So it was definitely very hard for me to leave public defense because I loved my job. But I felt like we were never gonna see the change that we wanted to see if people didn't join him or other people in doing the work. So I felt like it was an important, it was a little bit of a sacrifice, but I thought it was for a greater cause. And of course I thought it was exciting as well too, just to kind of see something from the ground up that we haven't really seen before. So that was what kind of attracted me to progressive prosecution, was the sense that, we could make some real significant change in the justice system. And then my boss got recalled and there was a lot of pushback. That pendulum didn't swing all the way back, but it swung back. And a lot of people had a lot of reaction to his policy reform. And so for me, I didn't want to work for anyone else, so I quit. But I still wanted to make sure I was, trying to work within that field. I still wanted to support other progressive prosecutors, and I did that at the nonprofit. And then when Pamela Price got elected in Alameda County, it felt like I could try to do it all over again. And since I'm from Alameda County, it felt more compelling for me to come back and work for her because, that's the city that I live in, the county that I live in. So hope that answers that.
Yes, thank you. And Lula, can you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to pursue criminal law, and then also what motivated you to get into education?
Yeah, so quite honestly, I kind of stumbled into defense work. I had no plan to be a public defender going into law school. I went to Georgetown and had no intention of being a trial attorney either. But I cared about social justice issues, I guess, in the abstract. And I think, like Leah, I think because of my Eritrean upbringing, I wanted to advocate for people who couldn't advocate for themselves, but I just wasn't sure in what form. And I think I initially saw myself doing that through the lens of education, because I was a middle school teacher before law school in Atlanta. But I think really that experience helped open my eyes to the criminal legal system, weirdly. I taught sixth grade, and I would say most of my students were touched by the system in some way. Either they had a parent or a family member who was involved, or they themselves were system involved in the juvenile system. And that was just shocking to me. Kids so young, having jail be the norm. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. And I saw how the system really had this harmful ripple effect, and not just for my kids, my students at the time, but I saw how it affected their families, their communities as a whole, and how it made it difficult for them to focus on education and that sort of thing. And so that experience, I think, led me to do the juvenile justice clinic at my law school, which really allowed me to see up close what the system looked like on the ground, how I think deeply flawed the system is. These were issues, again, I felt like I appreciated in the abstract prior to that experience, but seeing young people come into court in shackles, all of them Black, all of them not that much younger than me. And often for, at least, at the time in the juvenile system in DC, often for stuff that was like typical adolescent behavior. I had a lot of clients who were charged for really minor stuff, for like throwing a binder at a classmate in school, food fights, things like that. And I was just shocked. Like, it really shook my conscience to see that this was the state of the system. And I think that was really my personal motivation for doing the work. And I went on to work for a firm because it was the recession. It was hard to let go of a high paying job, but I knew long-term this was what I cared most about, and was determined to find a way to get back to that. In terms of teaching, I think when I first started being a public defender, that wasn't something I imagined doing either. But it was that fellowship program that I mentioned, the Prettyman program, that really first opened my eyes to law school teaching. I just wanted to be a good public defender at the time. But working with law students, even though I was still a new lawyer myself, really forced me to learn how to translate this information in a digestible way. And I saw that I was starting to inspire a new generation of lawyers, even though I was still pretty new myself. Just seeing their excitement and their energy and their outrage was really inspiring. And so after that experience, I knew I wanted to practice for some time, but I imagined that would be my long-term, or I hoped that would be my long-term career path. And I'm fortunate to have had this position to start this new clinic. And it has really kind of renewed my passion for the work. It's wonderful working with students and to watch them grow. And so it's been very rewarding.
Great.
Sorry, that was long-winded.
No, I appreciate everything you said. Andom, can I ask you, what steps did you take before or during law school to prepare yourself kind of for the career you got into?
Yeah. So before law school, I went and worked. I was able to intern at the Eritrean Supreme Court. After undergrad, I was kind of a backpacking nomad. I lived in Morocco and kind of traveled to Southern Europe. And then at the end, I was like, all right, I want to go to law school. I need to do something. I can't just, sit here on a beach for 6 months. So I was able to get an internship at the Eritrean Supreme Court in Alameda. So I went there for about 6 weeks, almost 2 months, and really kind of got to see what could be, if that makes sense. I don't want to go too much into the cases, but kind of seeing the how justice was being carried out, how the court at a very basic level was functioning was to me inspiring. I really enjoyed my time. I can talk more offline about some of the cases too, if you guys want to. While in law school, probably the best. So the University of Missouri is known for its alternative dispute resolution. It's like ranked 2 or 3 in the country for it. So we use a big emphasis on like the people skills. You can be a good writer, right? Which is fine. For transactional practice, it's great, right? If you need to be in the court, you need to be able to be on your toes. You need to be able to maneuver, be quick-witted, understanding nuances, understanding interpersonal feedback you're getting from the jury, the judge, reading a room, if you will. So I did a lot of ADR competitions, negotiation, arbitration, you name it. If I was going to point to a singular class or program that helped me, I took trial advocacy. And it was kind of a boot camp. The professor was kind of off in his own place. He was a renowned litigator in the Midwest. So school kind of let him do what he wanted. Half the class were at his house on his farm, and really got us outside of our shell on public speaking. And being able to handle adversity on your feet, because you're some judges, you'll have the case law, everything dead to rights, and the judge will just be opposite and just disagree with you, right? So trying to get either it's helped me in my practice, trying to get a jury instruction that you rate, but the judge is being hard-headed about it, or dealing with an obstinate witness who just all of a sudden is going off the reservation on you, right? Those type of skills that are crucial for a good litigator. I think the trial advocacy class that I took, if I was going to point to a singular thing, it was probably the best thing I ever did.
Yeah, trial advocacy, I would agree. That's a very helpful class, and it's the closest you're going to get as far as like what you would actually do in a courtroom. Let me ask about, if I could start with Leah, what does an average day look for you? Like what does that look like for you? Just a regular work day. And I want to ask you, tell us like what an average day looked like when you were a public defender, and then also what it looks like.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good clarification, because I don't think my average day to day is exactly what you would expect if you're going to be a DA right off the gate, or be a public defender for that matter right off the gate. So now I have a pretty nice gig. I get to the office at 9, and right now the way that it's divided, the work is that I have a colleague that does most of the in custody domestic violence charging. So people who are charged with domestic violence but are like in jail that day and we have a deadline of like 4 p.m. to charge. I don't do that mostly. She does, but I assist in that. So I'll see if there's any cases that she wants me to handle that day of where their person is in custody and the deadline is at 4 o'clock. Or I'm mostly focusing on an out of custody, people who are not in jail, and there's not really a deadline because it's kind of a backlog of cases that I'm now assigned to kind of address. Basically I review the police reports. I review police reports where someone is accused of domestic violence, and other assorted crimes kind of related. There's been some sex crimes there, and things like that. And then I review the case to see if we can prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. That's the standard I use when I'm if I'm charging cases. Or that I can reasonably expect that I can, prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And then the second question is, does the victim want prosecution? So sometimes we have a case that we think we can prove, but the victim has indicated to us that they don't want to prosecute against their the partner or their ex-partner. And so I make decisions that day of whether so I review the cases, I make my decision, and then I enter all the information into the computer. Kind of, if I'm not going to charge, I'll say why I'm not going to charge, and I'll give, a factual background and kind of explain legally. That way, in the future, if someone has a question about why I made a decision, that they can review that for themselves. So it's a little bit, it's not a matter of just being like, victim doesn't want to cooperate, leave it be. I'm going to explain my reasoning behind it. And then that's just pretty much all day. I have officers that come in throughout the day, sometimes kind of an out of custody case, but they're kind of, they've been focusing on that case, and they're bringing it to my attention to say, can you charge this now? Like get ahead of top of the queue. Or they might say, hey, like, this is what I have, what else do you think we should do to get it ready for potential charging? And so I'll say, hey, I think we should do this type of investigation and things like that. So that takes up my whole day, but it's definitely a desk job. I'm not in court. And I'm interacting with police officers, my colleagues, victims, things like that. So, I like my job, and it's a pretty good, it's a job I could technically do from home. So if I have my police reports and everything, I can bring it home and work from home, which is a nice spot to be in criminal law, which is not necessarily work often to work from home. Now I'll say what I did when I was a public defender, much different. I did misdemeanors and then I did felonies, and the average day was different every single day, but I was in court a good chunk of a week that was either pre-trying cases, which means negotiating with the DA about like outcomes of the case, to say, here, let's resolve the case, but here's what I want. So yeah, that big chunk of it was, if I was in court, was pre-trying cases and trying to resolve it if possible. If I'm at my desk, I'm working on my cases, doing investigations. But each day is different, I'll say that. And that's, I think, the really wonderful thing about being a public defender, is that it is absolutely not a boring job, and you're not going to look at your watch. You're not like,
right
that's
here.
not
Yeah,
part of
man.
how the job works. So I really like that part of it. And then if I was in trial, that was all I was focused on. So everything else would be covered by colleagues, and I would just be focusing on being in trial, and that's an all-consuming thing. You're getting to work super early, you're working super late into the night, you're doing all that. And then when I was a prosecutor in San Francisco, the tail end, I did charging cases. So that looks like looks like now for me as a DA charging in Alameda County. But when I first got there, I was doing just general felonies. I was doing preliminary hearings for the government. And that was a really intense experience. PXs are just basically a felony. When you're charged someone with a felony, the government has to prove that there's probable cause that a crime occurred or that felony occurred. So it's the first opportunity that someone charged with a felony, or largely the first opportunity a person charged with a felony has an opportunity to kind of see if the government has enough evidence. Generally speaking, obviously the hope is that we do have enough evidence, because that would be a miscarriage of justice if we did not. But occasionally the PX result is that, they don't think one or two things have been proven, and so they'll discharge that. But in general, if you are doing your job correctly as the DA and you're going to these preliminary hearings, you should be holding people to answer to the crimes that they've been accused of, not because you take any joy in holding them to answer, but because it would be wrong if we had charged them with the crime that we didn't have enough evidence for. But I was in court every single day, doing preliminary hearings, and that was kind of, I didn't do anything beyond the preliminary hearing. So if the person was held to answer, it would get reassigned to someone else for trial. That was what my days look like.
Got it. And Lula, what does your average day look like right now?
So I think my experience is very similar to Leah's when she was a public defender. So I don't have much more to add. But one of the things I really love about the work is it's not boring. There really is no average work day. It's a lot of, putting out fires and emergencies, and nothing goes as planned, which can be frustrating, but it also makes for a very interesting day. In terms, just very broadly speaking, my day can involve going to court. Like Leah said, most days out of the week, sometimes you're spending all day in court, especially if you're in trial. That is all consuming, as Leah mentioned, and that's all I'm able to focus on. Meeting with clients, working with clients, whether in the community or if they're in custody at the jail, negotiating with prosecutors, reviewing discovery, making discovery demands, and investigation. When I was in practice, as I got more senior, I had the luxury of having investigators assigned to me. So they primarily did investigation, but in the beginning, a lot of the investigation I did myself, fact investigation in the field. So I was interviewing witnesses and going to the crime scene, taking photographs, all of that stuff, which it's a lot of work, but it's I think very interesting. It remained very interesting, after many years of doing this work. I still find it very engaging. So,
and tell me, what's the most rewarding aspect of your job?
Mine, me, yeah, that's a great question. I think I mean, there are a lot of rewarding aspects. But as simple as it sounds, I would say just working with the clients. I think being able to build connections and get to know my clients' stories and journeys is really rewarding. I think it's a privilege to be able to be someone's advocate and to be able to get to know someone so intimately and deeply, to be able, to speak for them in court, I think is really a privilege, and I would say the most rewarding thing about the work.
And what about the most challenging aspect of your job?
There are many. But I would say, I think the most, if I had to pick my top, the most challenging is probably the emotional piece. I'll be real. I think it's very important, for anyone who's really thinking about doing this work, for us to be honest about these challenges. And for me, it can be very emotionally taxing. Our clients, my clients endure a lot of hardship and trauma. They're often dealing with very difficult issues. They may be debilitated by mental health or substance abuse, and that can be very difficult. And it's easy to kind of internalize these emotional challenges. And that's something I feel like I did for a very long time. I really could not separate work and personal life. And I took my work home with me. And I think, what's called secondary trauma, this indirect exposure to trauma, is also very traumatic for the people who are serving as advocates. I think that is really real. And I'm still figuring out coping strategies, quite honestly, and the tools, for dealing with it. But for me, I think just like leaning on my community of colleagues, other defenders has been really great. I lean on them for commiseration and support. Just being able to talk to somebody who understands what you're going through, I think, can be really important. And I'm practicing. I've become better at practicing self-care. I hate that term self-care. I think it can be very loaded, but whatever it is for you, I think whatever you can do to reduce stress is important. And for me, that's, being with my loved ones, being with my kids in particular. I think especially once I had kids, my priorities, I was able to I had a different perspective on the work, and I was able to do a better job of separating work and my personal life. And so my kids are also a form of self-care for me. So that's how I deal with it. I mean, I don't know that I deal with it perfectly. It continues to be a challenge, but I think the rewarding aspects certainly for me outweigh the challenges.
Got it. Thank you. Andom, can I ask you, how do you deal with the kind of high stress and emotional toll that the work takes on you? And really, honestly, for all lawyers, because I think no matter what, just this career in general is just very stressful. So tell us a little bit about what you.
So I think it's different from when you're a prosecutor to a defense counsel. So I'll talk on the prosecutor side. I think for the prosecutor side, I think what worked for me is being, you can't choose who your boss is, you can't choose who your supervisors are, but I think it's healthy to talk through your cases when you're starting to have doubts. Doubt is what kills a prosecutor, right? You start having doubts before you go in the courtroom, your advocacy becomes less zealous, your points may not get across, you can get, knocked off track. So I think that, and then that doubt will lead to stress. Stress will lead to other adverse, impacts. So for me, when I was a prosecutor, just talking through the cases, identify mentors, use your mentors, right? Let them know, like, hey, I need to run this by you. We need to talk. Talking through it to make sure that your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, to reduce doubt, therefore reduce stress, I think was a big deal for me, right? Because some of the worst things that could happen, especially as a new prosecutor, you walk into court and you've got this grand plan, and all of a sudden we're like, hey, it's your plan is not permissible because of X rule, or did you dot, check this document or this form or this whatever. So I think reducing stress is reducing doubt is important as a prosecutor. You can do that through communication. From the prosecutor side of the house, I think being able to excise yourself from the crime, if you will, and kind of more focus on the person.
You mean the defense side?
Yes, from the defense side, when I was a defense counsel, because there's nothing worse than you're in. I don't know how it is in state courts, but for us, accused and counsel, please rise at sentencing, right, or at the verdict. That's some nerve-wracking stuff right there. So I think for me, we're just trying to understand, like, hey, you did your best. The law is the law. Making sure that you have properly communicated with your client. I think communication was a big deal for me to manage stress and expectations. That's from a work perspective. From a self-care perspective, and I use that term too, I think having a hobby is important, or having something outside of the office. Because when I was a prosecutor, I was young, no wife, no kids, just hooking and jabbing out in California. I probably think I got a little too much into the weeds, right? Because some people just try to perfect the case into perpetuity. It wasn't a good idea. So I had to get pulled aside by a mentor. Was like, hey, you need to go figure something out for fun. Develop a hobby, stick with it. So for me, being in the service, working out is not a hobby. It's kind of a default thing, right? So travel became a thing. So I get into hiking and mountaineering, doing all kinds of stuff in the national parks. That helped. As a defense counsel, is different. I needed to make sure I could leave the stress and trauma from work at work, because now I got 2 kids. So for me, I was a big proponent, and at that point I was also supervising like 8 or 9 guys and telling them, like, hey, I need to see what your plan of action is for fun. Like every weekend, what are you guys doing? Communicating with them, making sure they're not picking up some terrible habits. I've had to testify at a couple bar disciplinary hearings, and it's almost always for alcohol related incidents. And a question that they ask is, what resources were made available to you from your supervisor? Did you communicate your struggles with anyone? If the answer is no, it's bad on the attorney, but bad on the supervisor too. So being cognizant of that, I try to make an effort to ensure that we had, a safety plan, if you will. Like, what is going on with you guys? What are your plans for the weekends, for trips? Ensuring that they are taking their vacation, right? I'm sure you guys all know attorneys who have like 2 years worth of vacation on the books. They never take it. That's a sign, right? If you got kids in a family, you got multiple years worth of holidays stacked up, like, use them. I think that comes with time and being sure of yourself and being able to advocate for yourself. Like, hey, boss, whatever happens now is fine, but like May 24th to June, I'm out. And when you're out, this is really bad today because of these bloody phones. Disconnect. If you're on leave, you're on vacation, go on vacation, y'all. That's something that's very important, because that mindset, your mind needs time to refresh, your body needs time to refresh. So now, like, if I go play golf, I picked up golf because as we get older and we're Habesha, we try to play soccer every weekend. Knees won't hold up. So when I'm on the golf course, the phone's in the car. I do a lot of cycling. We go cycling. One person in the group will have a phone. Everyone else, we're just focusing on the road ahead. It's cathartic. Sorry, that was kind of long. Sorry.
No worries. I appreciate that. Can I ask you, have you ever had a case where you thought there was either a moral or ethical conflict as far as like you being able to handle it? If so, how did you end up?
Oh yeah, so this is big. So for us, right, my Missouri bar sponsors me or allows me to practice in federal court, right? You have to be admitted to the state bar, the highest bar of one state within the union, right? But then we've practiced under the federal rules of evidence, federal rules of criminal procedure, all that kind of crap. But your ethical standards normally belong to your state. So here's what happened. There was a case where it was a sexual assault case. Little context: in the military, adultery is against the law, right? But a defense to adultery is rape. So we had a situation where I was convinced this is a false allegation of sexual assault. this just did not happen. The facts, how it lined up, the evidence or the lack of it. I was prosecuted. The lack of evidence, lack of witnesses, lack of everything was just not there. There was a lot of political pressure to prosecute sexual assaults. And we were getting our butts kicked because we kept taking cases that we knew we were going to lose or we didn't believe in, but no one was standing up. And finally, I had enough of it. I was like, I'm not taking this case. There's no way this barely passes, probable cause, let alone beyond a reasonable doubt. And hey, the government, you can't make me. Well, they tried. They froze the case, sent an investigator out from DC to California and like, hey, what is going on? Why is this captain saying he's not going to take this case? And it was challenging. Like they took all my cases away for a little bit to review what was going on, like all my cases. And I stood my ground. I was like, no, I don't believe this is right. My bar says that I have an ethical obligation to object if I don't believe in the merits of a case, and I did. They kind of flipped the script on me. At that time, we didn't have investigators. We did our own investigation. They're like, okay, so find out what actually happened. If you don't think, what's the truth? So they gave me basically an open checkbook, like go figure it out if that's the case. And I did. I basically got the complaining victim to basically say that she was afraid of getting in trouble for adultery at the time because she was still on active duty. Now that she was off active duty, she didn't really care what happened. She was living her life in Oregon. It's like, no, this is all crap. I don't know why you guys are still prosecuting this. And the case went away. But you want to talk about consternation and stress. That was about 4 months of my life where I was persona non grata in the office. In a team environment, I wasn't a team player, if you will. They were happier that I take the case to court and put this poor guy through the stress of trial, right, of sexual assault, of felony level crime, and lose, right? They're okay with me going to the case and losing, vice just doing the right thing and not going to trial at all. So that was not fun.
Yeah, that sounds, as a prosecutor, I can say that sounds extremely stressful. Trying to be pressured to go to do a trial that you don't 100% believe in, or that you don't believe is that a crime has been committed. But Lula, can I ask you that same question? Have you ever had a case or handled a case with a moral or ethical conflict that you had to deal with?
Yeah, so it hasn't come up often, surprisingly. I think I thought I would have more internal struggles about the work than I did. But it wasn't a case per se, but a client I had very early on in my career who was affiliated with the Ku Klux Klan. He was an older gentleman from Southern Virginia who was just driving through DC, and he had a bunch of guns and a bunch of KKK paraphernalia, and didn't have a license to carry guns in DC. So that's how he landed in DC. And I still vividly remember him in the cell block. He was terrified. He was, in a cell block full of non-white people, I will say. And then he saw me, and I told him, I was being appointed to represent him. And the look of shock and terror really on his face still sticks out in my mind. He didn't outwardly reject my representation. Well, he really couldn't have, because he didn't have money. That's how he ended up with a public defender. And I think he realized that, but it was clear he was very uncomfortable with me. I think didn't trust me, so it made the representation quite challenging. But then as surprisingly, as we both got to know each other, and I got to know his family, the situation kind of worked out itself. I mean, I knew what his views were about people of color, and that was hard. But it didn't directly interfere with the representation. And I think I eventually got him a very good outcome in his case, diversion. And so I think that helped. I think that helped the relationship. But on my end, I think as I got to know his wife and his family, I understood where he was coming from, and that his views were a product of how he was raised, and he started opening up about that. And so I think what that experience in general taught me about this work is that people are just really complex, and multi-layered, and everyone has a journey. And, I think there's just so much more to who they are. And so I think since then, I really haven't had internal conflicts like that before, because I've been able, Andom was talking about separating the charges. I've had some really tough cases. When I was in practice, I had handled the most serious felony cases, murder, sexual assaults, child sexual assaults, right? I mean, on paper, cases that are very difficult. And, the types of charges that society is, demonizes, right? And I understand that, but I'm able to separate the charges and the allegations from my ability to represent them. I believe everyone deserves quality representation regardless of the type of case. And so it hasn't been as much of a struggle as I envisioned, or a struggle at all, really, besides that experience.
Leah, do you want to answer that question as well? Have you had a moral or ethical conflict at all in any of your cases? If so, kind of how do you deal with it?
I would say that kind of similar to Lula, when it came to be a public defender, I didn't have any ethical qualms about it. It's because it's just very simple and direct what your role is as a public defender, and it's to zealously represent your clients within the bounds of the law and telling the truth. But other than that, everything goes. And I was okay. I was comfortable with that. Because I do think that if the government is going to accuse you of a crime, they better prove it. And so I think in that sense, I think when you're a public defender, that's what people expect, that might be an ethical dilemma, representing people accused of crimes that you might not approve of. But I guess for me, there might be crimes that obviously that I think are disturbing, and I wish that didn't happen. But people are not the worst thing they've ever done. This is simple as that. And it's the way in which you can kind of care about your family and love your family, and they can do things you disagree with. So in that sense, and the way you would still maybe defend your family member, or or try to give a full picture about your family member. If they did something that somebody else thought was abhorrent, you kind of explain them. That's what you're doing that for someone else, basically, what you'd want someone to do for you. So that was not difficult. I think, in regards to prosecution, I think it's still similar to what Andom said. It's basically, I think the biggest concerns are when you have a case and you think that the person didn't do it, right? And as he's mentioned before, but you don't pick who your boss is when you're a DA. And it's a little different than being a defense attorney, in that when you're a defense attorney, your job, very, very rarely are your bosses telling you what to do. It really, I think it's surprising before you do that work, but really it's between you and your client, and it's you and your bar card and your client. So as long as it's ethical, nobody has any there's no one telling you try it like this, or do it like this. But when you're a DA, for better or for worse, it is an elected position, and so you serve at the pleasure of that DA. And so sometimes there can be conflict between that. So I had cases where I just thought we couldn't prove it, and it wasn't as simple as me just going to court and dismissing it, right? It's going up the chain and talking to people and showing them that you're not just coming to this conclusion easy peasy, but that that you've thought about it, you reviewed the evidence, and making the case. So I think those are the dilemmas that you have. And, of course, that feeling when you're getting pushback, when people are disagreeing with you, or for me, the struggle is then how do I stay ethical? How do I, because your name is something that is that's the most valuable thing you have, your reputation. And once you lose that, I think that's not something that you can get back very easily. And so I never wanted to be the type of DA where, you know, where where I had any regrets about how I conducted myself and how I handled cases. And so that's where the ethical dilemma came in, where there was a tension between what I believe was the state of the case and what people higher than myself thought. In the end, it always worked out. I was lucky because I had bosses that had similar values to me. But, you know, occasionally they would disagree with me. And so I didn't dismiss the case. And then it went to someone else just by the nature of how the work works. And then that person who was more, you know, true blue DA, if you want to say, had the same exact opinion, you know what I mean? And so eventually the right thing happened, but sometimes that was maybe the closest. But so I hope that answers that question.
Yes, definitely. Absolutely. I've got another question I'd like to ask actually all three of you. What do you feel like is the most critical power or responsibility that you have as an attorney in the criminal justice system? And how do you use that power to make a positive impact in society? I guess I'll take a volunteer.
I can go.
Okay, but I also want to follow up specifically as an Eritrean-American, what unique perspective do you have as well in this role? We could take that either as a two-part question or just start with what do you think is the most important power you have? How do you use it? But eventually I want you to kind of tie it into like, as an Eritrean-American in that.
So I'll go first. So I guess the most important role I think I have right now is the discretion that I have, right? And so and that's what often with DAs when they come to your law schools talk about is the discretion that you have. And I would say that the level of discretion you have changes from office to office, job to job, role to role. So I think it's an important thing, you know, it is a power intrinsic to the job, but your ability to use it changes. So just to keep that in mind if you're thinking about being a DA. But right now, in reviewing these cases for charging, I pretty much am able to have carte blanche to do what I think is correct. So review the case and decide if we're going to charge it or not. And I think that's very powerful in that for a lot of reasons, right? I'm not giving a bad case to a poor DA to kind of litigate and deal with a case that, you know, it happens when you're a DA where you're in court all day and you're getting cases assigned to you and you have some charging DA who's completely out of touch with what, you know, how things, like how to actually, they haven't tried a case in many, many years. And they give it to someone who is litigating, who's like, why did you give me this like pile of garbage case? So I that way I'm definitely have a powerful effect on like other people who have to charge these cases or litigate these cases. But also the person that's been potentially was going to get accused of a crime is now not going to have that. And I think it's an important thing because people charge cases that really don't pass muster. And then now a defense attorney and a defendant has to spend a year, 2 years, months kind of fighting against a charge that someone really should have known from the very beginning couldn't. And so by not putting people in that position, I think you're not putting like the stress of criminal charges over somebody. You're not having the system expend resources in trying to kind of like litigate this whole incident that we know we don't have enough evidence for. So I think that's the most important power I have right now. As far as my perspective of being like Eritrean, I think it's, you know, it's an interesting dynamic, I think, to be American and both understand what it's like for people to be immigrants and then also to understand the experience of being Black in America. So I think that's definitely, I have loads of empathy and understanding for a whole bunch of people that are in the system. And so I think I think that background, I feel very lucky to have it. I feel really lucky to be from the family that I'm from, and to be from where I'm from. Like, I feel like it's a special kind of interesting background to have, and unique, and it uniquely enables you to kind of navigate this country in a way that I think is really interesting. So I think there's that. And I think it makes me a better trial attorney for sure, because, I think one of the amazing things about, like, what really separates a great attorney from, or a great trial attorney, I think, is kind of your ability to explain concepts to all different types of people. And I think in just trying to explain my job to my family, and who doesn't have a legal background, and kind of like trying to explain what reasonable doubt means, or what this crime is, or things like that, I think I'm not talking to lawyers in my family. I'm talking, to just regular people who don't have as much experience in the legal system. So much like most people in our juries, right? And so I do think that has given me a really good ability to explain kind of complicated concepts, and make it understandable for people. And so, yeah, I would say that's maybe the two main ways that my background kind of informs my work.
Thank you.
Sorry,
I
that was my
appreciate
dog. I'm sorry.
that. Either Lula or Andom, do either of you want to take the question next?
Yeah, I think for me, I think they overlap. I think the power that's given to me and how I wield it is part and parcel to my upbringing, because I lived in Eritrea for 7-8 years in my formative years as a kid. Went to school there, and then worked there as an adult later on. So how it makes me more responsible, like especially when I'm on the prosecutorial side, is to a certain extent, and I'm not trying to make a progressive justice point here, but understanding what's really at stake, right? You guys heard of the concept, champagne problems. Is this really the crime that you're thinking it is? Does this really rate, 1,500 man hours and $40,000 to prosecute this, right? There's real problems in the world. There's real suffering. This isn't it, right? Trying to be able to have that background of, like, what you guys think is a problem is only a problem on a superficial level. I think it helps me better understand the worth of human life. I feel the worth of crime and punishment, and kind of checking people who get on power trips. Being in the military, we are a very hierarchical structure, right? Sometimes the folks, when they get higher up, they can lose their head in the cloud. So it helps me kind of bring them back to earth. It's like, hey, you've had power for like that long. Understand how this is going to impact long term. I think helps shape me. The other side of the house, I think, is also from a defense perspective. I think it makes me much more sensitive to people's background, right? The gist of why did they do this, right? Am I dealing with somebody who's just like malevolent, or am I dealing with something that's a mental health trauma, an upbringing trauma, or something where this gal just didn't know right from wrong, right? Or this was like an innocent mistake or an act done out of desperation, versus somebody who just like willfully ignoring or willfully disobedient. I think having seen a wider range of the human experience than my peers has allowed me to maybe make my practice more equitable, if you will, more empathy, which is, especially from the government side, we can lose sight of that, either just by the sheer volume of cases, or the structure we are, right? The dehumanization of the accused. So I think that helps kind of bring it full center to me.
And Lula, can you tell us a little bit about kind of what you think are the most critical powers or responsibilities you have as an attorney in the criminal justice system, and specifically how being Eritrean-American impacts you?
Sure, I'll take the Eritrean question first, if that's okay, because I really do second, I think, everything that Andom and Leah said. I think being Eritrean really has shaped my perspective tremendously as an advocate. The only thing I would add is I think because throughout history, we were and continue to be the underdogs, if you will. You know, we're a resilient people, and I think that has instilled a level of tenacity in me that makes, I don't know if it gives me an advantage, but I think that helps make me be an effective advocate. I think to be a public defender, you can't back down, right? You have to keep going. You have to be resilient and not accept the status quo or power imbalances. And I think my ability to do that is very much shaped by who I am as an Eritrean, and just the value of service, which we've all kind of touched on throughout. My parents didn't really understand what a public defender really involved when I took this career path, but they taught me from a very young age the value of just helping others. And you know, the value of using your education to do so. You know, I very much appreciate how privileged I am, having grown up here, being able to go to law, you know, go to college, go to law school, get my higher education. And I think that really drove me to use my education to serve others in some way. In terms of the most important responsibility, I think was the question. I'll be brief. I mean, I've touched on this, but I think because as a public defender, you get to know people so intimately and deeply that you have a responsibility to really tell their stories in a way that is effective and to amplify, you know, a counter narrative, because the government, the prosecutors, the police, they have one view of who your client is and what the case is about. And that view is often informed by, you know, just the charges, right? I mean, who your client is often not information they have. And so I think my biggest responsibility is to present that counter narrative, to present the fuller picture and, you know, the story about who my client is, how they came to be before the court, all of that, and to shift the power imbalances, right? I mean, just, you know, I don't feel like I have a lot of power because, you know, my counterparts on the other side, no offense, right, are really the ones who have most of the power. And I, you know, I'm just trying to do harm mitigation and to kind of stand in the way of the government taking my client's liberty and, you know, stand in the way of you know, them really being impacted by the system in a negative way. And so I would say, I think those are my most important responsibilities as a defender.
So I do want to wrap up, but I want to, well, first, we're going to get into a question and answer session. I already see that there's already one question in the chat. Before we get into the question and answer session, though, I would like to just wrap up with any final thoughts. I know that I believe there are a lot of people that are either in law school or thinking about going to law school. So if there's any final thoughts that any of you have, specifically maybe, you know, tips that you can give to people who want to get into law, or any motivational words you may have, let's do that first, and then we'll get into the question and answer session. So completely voluntary if anyone has anything they'd like to say. Otherwise, we can just start with the question and answers.
I guess I would say one thing of like motivation, or I mean, I don't want to presume too much about other people's like backgrounds or what they're experiencing within their families, or what they've been exposed to. But for me specifically, I didn't, I think I knew one lawyer growing up. It was like our next door neighbor. But like, I didn't have any conception of what it took to be a lawyer. I didn't know what that job looked like. I think it was a very like intimidating thing to pursue. And I think, at least in my family and my extended family or family friends, it was just not like necessarily the type of job that, like, it wasn't what I saw Eritrean people choosing. You know, I saw a lot of like people choosing the medical profession and engineering and things like that. And which is all great. I mean, I've had moments where I was like, I should have been an engineer, but here we are. But that is just to say that you can still do it, and that there are a lot of people who want to help you get there. And I'm including this panel, and that that just may be that you're the first person in your family that's going to do this work, and then you're going to be able to help other people. I know, like, when I became a lawyer, it was very, like, my family was very proud of me, very happy for me, but, you know, got kind of surprised, and then kind of surprised that I chose criminal law of all things. And now I have a young cousin who's in college who's going to go be a lawyer, and who had seen me her whole childhood be the lawyer in the family. And so already I just see it in my family that it just is more, it's just different. And so I just want to, I guess, I don't know what the takeaway of that is. It's just to say, like, don't be intimidated by something if you don't have a lot of context for it, that if you feel like it's your calling, if you feel drawn to it, keep pursuing it and keep reaching out to people, and that there will be people who can support you through that, um, and that's not necessarily a disadvantage, because when you do end up going to law school, you're going to be around so many people whose parents are lawyers, whose grandparents are lawyers and judges, and it can really kind of throw you for a loop. I think before law school, I was quite a confident person, and you know, and then being in that kind of context, I felt really insecure about myself, and felt like maybe I don't belong here. Um, um, and then you get to know these people, and you realize they are not that smart. They just had opportunities. They're not brilliant in any shape or form. You have classes with them, and you're just like, that is the most inane thought I've ever heard. And their grandparents a judge, you know? And so it doesn't matter. And that a lot of times that they have the opportunity, but they're not, I feel like there were people that I went up against in court that I just ran circles around, and they went to a more prestigious school than me. They have more of the background. But as Lula was saying, they don't have the perseverance. You know, like, when something bad happens, they're like falling apart. And that's not, to me, when I think about my family story of coming to this country, I'm not going to cry over some little thing in, like, court. I'm going to persevere, you know? And so, in the end, it doesn't end up being a disadvantage. It ends up being an advantage, truly. And it's going to make you a better lawyer, especially if you want to do the trial work. My ability to relate to a jury is so much better than so many of my peers, because I grew up with so many different types of people. So that's my kind of long-winded encouragement. Just don't be discouraged or intimidated.
Okay, I'll be quick. So I was laughing at Leah because I am in the first guy in my family to go to law school. The doctors, engineers is like my entire family, and I got the small piece of chicken for like a while. I almost like finished the bar, and then now my siblings have all gone to law school, and now like they really don't like me. On that note, I got three quick things. You know, typical Eritrean fashion. We all play Ramino, right? The card game, right? Okay. What happens if you got a bad hand? You don't just wait and pray for like you get, you know, that last six. You switch it up. So for the folks that are, you know, in law school or just starting out, don't be afraid to switch it up. If like Lula was saying, right? She went to a big firm, a whole lot of money, didn't like it, switched. It's okay. Take a chance on yourself, have confidence in yourself. If you start off with private practice, criminal practice, and you don't like it, you can switch. You can reinvent yourself, right? I just got an LLM last year. Now I do practice that has nothing to do with anything in the trial world, and I'm happy. I was happy either way. But so be confident in yourself. If you don't like it, explore, experiment. You never know what you may fall in love with, right? That's one. Two, it's not that bad. Promise you guys, the bar is not that bad. That one paper, it's not, and nothing there is fatal. No one's coming to get you. The boogeyman's is not, you know, in the judge's chambers. So just take everything try to give a real world analysis to what it's worth. When I was a 3L, seeing the 1Ls run around with like the chickens with the heads cut off, when I become a supervisor, my first year practitioners, it was amazing how they would blow like the smallest, comment from a judge would be like, woe is me, I'm depressed, I'm staying in my home all weekend. You know what I mean? So just know your value, know your worth, and take everything with a grain of salt, if you will. You're gonna make mistakes. It's okay. As long as you're not like actively stealing money from your clients or showing up to court drunk, 9 out of 10 times you're gonna be fine. No one's coming to get you. And then the last thing I want to say is for those that are interested in law school, specifically for you guys, I get counted a lot. Don't go unless you really want to go. Don't go to make your mom and dad happy. Don't go because you think you're gonna, make bank. You'll just be miserable. Know yourself, self-reflect, and then if you think this is really what you want to do, talk to some folks, get a good idea, and then go. Because it's shocking when you get to your second and third year when everyone's like adamantly declaring they're never going to practice law. Why are they here? It was the family business, or it was what my mom and dad told me to do. So that's it.
I think they said it all. It's a good way to end.
All right, well, we're going to get into the question and answer session. I see that there's already one question in the chat, so we'll start with that. I did want to let folks know that if you have a question, I guess you can either put the question into the chat or use the little reaction thing to raise your hand, and then we'll call on you so that you can ask your question. We've already kind of mentioned that, this isn't a space for legal advice or anything like that. So just questions that relate specifically to kind of like the topics we've been talking about. Not like, what is your opinion about this case or that case or stuff like that. But we'll start with the question that we have in the chat. The question is from Haben. It says, to the person who went to Hastings Law School, which that would be Leah. And I actually went to Hastings as well. And I will take this moment to shout out Leah. She was a year ahead of me and definitely took me under her wing, would give me resources, study materials, et cetera, and just check on me periodically throughout the semester. So I appreciate that. But let me just ask you, for the person who went to Hastings, that would be Leah, how was your experience at Hastings? And I guess it's called University of San Francisco. They changed the name, but go ahead.
Yeah, they changed the name. Yeah, so it's because apparently Hastings was a genocidal maniac or something like that. So it's mixed for me. So I mean, I don't have any regrets, but I don't tend to operate like that. I don't tend to like look back and be like, I wish I did this, I wish I did that. I kind of think everything is kind of meant to be. But the reputation that Hastings has is that it's very competitive. I think that if it seems like you're maybe potentially applying or considering applying to, and I think most people have heard that reputation, that is extremely competitive. And I think it is. So I think there are some schools you can go to that are a little bit more collaborative, and less competitive. But I think, so I was kind of like, so I grew up in the Bay Area. So I lived in Oakland when I went to Hastings. It was just just a BART ride every day. So I didn't like live on campus. I just commuted in every day. So I have a slightly different experience. I do think, so in that sense, it was kind of tough for me a little bit. But in general, I felt like, in the end, the reasons why I went there were the reasons why it was a good experience for me, which was that it's kind of a school that's like in the center of everything. So it's, they tell you that in law school, like about Hastings, like, oh, it's, it's so close to all these courthouses. And that's really is true. Like you are near all these, you're just blocks away from the public defender's office in San Francisco, the DA's office in San Francisco. It's all pretty much walkable. It's all these courthouses. And so in that sense, it feels like the network of Hastings people is pretty deep in the Bay Area. And so in that sense, it maybe is not a school super well known across the country, but has a very good reputation in the Bay Area and in California. And so it will, the school certainly won't have doors closed on you. It will definitely mostly open doors for you. Because in the history of the school, we've definitely been super high ranked at times. And so I think that was the reputation of the school. And so that's kind of long-winded. I'm not even sure I really answered your question. It's just, it was a mixed bag, but I have no regrets about it. And I do think that there are a lot of opportunities that can be gained from going there. I do think that one negative thing that you will hear about Hastings over and over again is that it's very competitive. And I do believe that that was the case when I went there.
I'll just add to that as well that, when you're going to law schools, the location of your law school is going to make a kind of like an impact on like what's available, what resources and stuff is available to you. So having a law school in San Francisco is a huge legal hub, just like DC, New York, Chicago. So there's a lot of firms that are in San Francisco or near San Francisco. So you'll have an opportunity to kind of like get into whatever type of law, whatever type of firm you want to do because you're in San Francisco. It looks like we have a question from Ephraim.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, good. First of all, thank you very much. Really great panel. I'm very proud of you. And Saron, I know your parents, and I'm very proud of your parents. They have invested their youth for Eritrea in a big way. So, and many of the rest of you, I'm sure your parents have contributed a lot in yours and also other people. So my question is about politics, but it's not about Eritrea, don't worry. The key question is, Leah mentioned about the reform-oriented, like district attorneys and stuff. So if you go back, for example, Black Lives Matter, it's really not the law, I don't think. I'm not a lawyer, so you can correct me. It's not about the law, it's about the implementation and the politics of it. And so when we talk about politics, for example, the Supreme Court in 1890s, or so, and said that separate but equal is constitutional. And then the same court, in 50 years later said, no, it's not constitutional. I don't think there's constitution was changed for that, but the politics has changed. The community, the understanding has changed. So it's one thing to have a policy and law and all that stuff, but it's another thing about implementing and having the political power to actually do what the community wants to be done. So how do you balance that, and what's your thought on these kind of challenges where the community wants something, but the power is not in the hands of the community? Thank you very much. Good job, by the way.
Yes, thank you for that question and all your comments. I appreciate them. And you raise a good point. And I think perhaps we can have Leah answer this question, but I'll kind of frame it like this. Before, when people wanted to kind of seek justice or equity in the criminal justice system, they were doing it through legislation, policies, and so forth. Now there's a move, essentially, your point that the laws kind of are there, but they haven't changed. It's like how you implement the law. And I think that's kind of the role of the district attorney. So now people are electing district attorneys, or at least district attorneys people are running to be district attorneys based on their view on how the law should be implemented. And Leah, do you want to follow up on that?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I had some thoughts. So I think that I agree with you in part, Ephraim, in that, some of the law does protect everyone, right? Or the law applies to everybody, but it's about having kind of the political power to use those levers of power to your benefit, right? And if you're in a minority group, that's difficult. But I do think that the laws often reflect the powers that the people who are in power. And so I think, to go to your point about Black Lives Matter, there's been this history that where the laws, in fact, have been designed to harm and incarcerate Black people in this country. And so it's not just a matter of implementation or being able to take advantage of the laws. I think that, like, for example, I mean, this is a very classic example, almost cliche, but like in the crack cocaine or the crack epidemic, right? Cocaine, the way that the laws were actually written in California up until very recently in California, was that if possession of cocaine was treated much more lightly than possession of crack. And so, and at the time that there was stark racial, like Black people use crack, white people use coke. And so that's I mean, I don't know if I'm answering your question or that was even your point, but I do think that there is, I think you're right in part. And I think it's a bit more complicated than that. Cause I do think that even I can speak to the criminal laws more precisely, that even in criminal law, it is not, it's certainly not applied equally, but even in the laws that were written, there were differences, and I think it had the intent and it had the impact of in affecting Black people differently. Is that answering your question, or do you?
No, you did pretty good. It's a balance, as he said, was basically there's a political power, meaning you have to have the power to implement anything, whether you have it on the law, on the books. You know, constitution could be written, but it's not may not be effective and not use that kind of stuff. That's one. On the other hand, you mentioned also the law was unfair to begin with. The crack is a very good example, and there was other stuff. But in the end, like the reform movement and that kind of stuff. Well, it's an ideal. It's very unfortunate that he was deposed, or should I recalled in San Francisco, for example. I worked for the city of San Francisco for many years, and I know that some of the history, and that's unfortunate. But that is the lack of political power for reform that the other side was able to win, and that's what I mean. So, but you balance it out. It's true there are laws and stuff, but thank you very much. I appreciate that. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
All right, so I think we're gonna go out into our breakout rooms. I think we just have a standard rule. Everyone turn your camera on so we know who we're speaking with in the breakout rooms. But should we do that now? Maybe Rahul, I'll let you take over.
Yeah. We'll give folks a minute to, button up your shirt or comb your hair or whatever it is. Don't be camera shy. These breakout rooms are just going to be maybe 3 to 4 people each. So it's important that we're all able to see each other and interact. Just want to thank our panelists again. This has been one of the most amazing sessions I've ever attended, not just hosted by the Eritrean Bar Association, but in general as a practicing attorney. I think it's really a unique opportunity we have as Eritrean-Americans to come together and to share our resources and to build, professional networks, to build civil society, right? We're new to America, and there's so much that we could do to support one another in our careers, in mentorship, and in our community. And that's essentially what the Eritrean-American Bar Association serves to do, is to be a platform to highlight the career paths of outstanding Eritreans like the ones we heard from today,